In this pod-slice summary of the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet-David holds a candid discussion with a man who's been in the trenches of America's justice system, Judge Joe Brown. Brown shares his unfiltered views about a variety of social and political issues prevailing today, and his observations paint a picture of a society transitioning in ways he does not agree with. Among the most notable topics is that of societal shifts over the last 55 years. Brown claims that the United States has gradually started glorifying dysfunction, with an instance being the rise of multi-generational families that perpetually rely on governmental aid, rather than using it for temporary respite. Through his experiences in courtrooms, Brown recounts encounters with families that leverage government support schemes as a primary source of income. The consequences, he claims, have been far-reaching, causing a ripple effect of dysfunction throughout communities. He mentions a woman who appeared in his courtroom who had numerous descendants, many of whom were also involved in criminal activity. Arguing that there is a clear connection between generational reliance on government aid and legal issues, Brown illustrates how, in his view, well-intended policies morph into enabling structures for those who exploit them. Brown also deems that America's shifts are part of efforts to dissolve traditional masculinity, a sentiment that has been in motion for over half a century, he suggests. He expresses concern about what he sees as an erasure of duty, honor, responsibility, and accountability, principles that he links inherently with manhood. Moving toward the effects of family structures, Brown divulges that many of the women appearing in his courtroom didn't want men around. In fact, they only sought their children. He attributes a degree of this mentality to feminist lectures given during the 60s, where women were encouraged to rear children without the involvement of their fathers. Another pivotal factor leading to this social shift, according to Brown, is the juvenile court system, which he claims has been leaning towards promoting dysfunction. Brown criticizes these courts for allowing women to collect child support from multiple men, regardless of paternity, underscoring the importance of DNA testing in these cases. Finally, Brown recognizes systemic racism as a prevailing issue, but insists that other considerable factors play a part in shaping the societal shifts seen in the past decades. His perspectives open up a theory that well-intentioned policies, when coupled with human opportunism, can lead to widespread societal issues. Judge Joe Brown's unfiltered conversation with Patrick Bet-David leaps between various topics, illuminating the judge's thoughts on systemic racism, masculinity in society, and what he terms as a rising anti-masculine movement. Brown spares no punches, insisting that systemic racism, while a reality, should not be used as an excuse. He urges listeners to confront adversity head-on, a perspective drawn from his belief in self-reliance and fortitude. This conversation transitions into his contention about how Black people have been used as guinea pigs for an anti-masculine movement. He describes seeing this trend start in the 60s when Black men were seen as the most overtly masculine and were therefore targeted first. He then discusses Russia and China's man-up campaigns against what he views as the global erosion of masculinity. Drawing from personal anecdotes and interactions, Brown paints a picture of societal changes that are leading to a reduction in traditional values surrounding courage, honor, and resilience. Allegedly, Brown sees a philosophy rising from the LGBTQ+ movement, comparing this new worldview to Buddhism, a religion based on a system of philosophy despite the lack of a deity. He believes this philosophy is being imposed by the government, leading to a blurring of lines between private and public life. The conversation navigates towards the state of manhood and masculinity. In his view, manhood is linked to rationality, critical thinking, courage, and a sense of duty towards the community. Its erosion, he feels, is leading to a propagandized dysfunction in society. Addressing societal heroes, Brown draws attention, perhaps unexpectedly, to political figures like Donald Trump and Florida's governor. He believes they made certain stands against societal currents, but were made boogeymen. He highlights this as a fallout of a weak platform from opponents. He also dives into the history of indentured servitude, drawing out lineages showing the connection between numerous past U.S. presidents. He believes this reflects a pattern in U.S. history that remains misunderstood. An exploration of the 2020 census next captures his attention, where he criticizes the lack of a citizenship question. In his opinion, this allows for skewed representation within the government. Finally, Brown discusses the balance between individual rights and the collective in influencing societal structures. He warns about the potential fallout of ignoring this balance, hinting at growing tensions in society. Through this impassioned discourse, Judge Joe Brown melds personal experiences, historical insights, and future concerns to discuss the path he sees America taking and its implications. During his conversation with Patrick Bet-David, Judge Joe Brown gives a vivid account of the societal changes observed starting from the 60s through to his current perspective. His astute commentary on communal shifts is interspersed with personal experiences and observations made through his career in law and criminal justice. Brown explains that he witnessed the birth of actions against societal norms while studying at UCLA during the 60s. Brown speaks about the Hollywood industry's manipulation of certain situations to suit hidden agendas, which he believes contributed to significant societal issues. The judge then moves on to discuss what he describes as the dark consequences of the civil rights movement, saying it acclimatized people to mass protests like the ones seen during the anti-war period. He delves deeper into this subject, indicating that protests have changed over time. What might have been dismissed as minor disturbances half a century ago are now under the spotlight due to extensive media coverage. Interestingly, Brown also analyzes the concept of entitlement, stating that in the past, people felt entitled to opportunities to uplift themselves. However, today, he feels entitlement is largely perceived as somebody else taking care of your needs from cradle to grave. Shifting the conversation, Brown elaborates on political affiliations, revealing his dissatisfaction with both Republicans and Democrats. In particular, he criticizes Republicans for their failure to engage with working-class citizens. He also explores the misconceptions about the size of minority groups like the trans, lesbian, and gay populations, arguing that the mass media often overrepresents these small groups. Drawing from his experiences, he shares his observations on the erosion of traditional masculinity within society, linking this issue to the rising popularity of gangster hip-hop culture. He stresses that this culture glorifies values aligned more with the feminine ideation than traditional masculine values. At one point, Brown presents a startling recollection of his encounters as a public defender. He brings attention to deep-seated systemic dysfunctions observed in families within projects that have become generational issues now. The conversation then turns toward policies that Brown believes have incentivized certain problematic behaviors and lifestyles, such as unmarried young mothers seeking financial gain from welfare systems. Brown critiques these policies, indicating the increase in single motherhood from 4% in 1940 to over 40% currently, according to CDC data. Through his discourse, Brown paints a rich tapestry of societal shifts, backed by his on-the-ground experiences and analysis. He navigates topics with an unflinching candor and invites listeners to critically question the current societal fabric. Bet David moves the conversation towards policy strategies, expressing frustration over programs that he perceives have incentivized destructive behavior. He discusses how investment in welfare initiatives has skyrocketed since the mid-1960s, yet the poverty rate remains relatively stagnant. He accuses these plans of destroying communities and criticizes politicians for non-action. Bet David fiercely emphasizes the need for change, arguing we need to eliminate incentives for welfare dependence. Next, they delve into the topic of emasculation. Brown points out a startling statistic. More men under 25 are virgins than women of the same age group. This talk leads to a discussion on the drastically dwindling male population in education and the workforce, which Brown believes is a severe consequence of society's neglect of boys. Moving on to themes of masculinity and heroism, Brown argues against what he perceives as an erosion of character building in culture and society. He speaks about a lack of real-life heroes and remarks that the American military seems to be focusing more on gender reassignment than providing adequate protective gear for troops. Bet David discusses the changing demographic of the UK due to high rates of immigration without careful regulation. Brown echoes these concerns, arguing that America has prioritized undocumented immigrants over its citizens and legal immigrants. He expresses his preference for legal immigration and points out the potential security issues with unchecked immigration. Brown and Bet David wrap this segment by discussing how society's affirming language might contribute to these observed shifts. Bet David questions whether the constant reinforcement of accepting non-traditional gender identities, particularly without parental involvement, could have a significant impact on social and cultural trends. Engaging in a heated debate, Patrick Bet David and Judge Joe Brown spar over societal issues that they perceive to be perpetuating emasculation and diluting robust policies. Brown argues young children must learn how to handle adversity themselves without constant adult intervention. He criticizes the rise in sissification of the country, blaming it for violent events that occur in schools or neighborhoods. Staying on masculinity, Brown emphasizes that lessons of masculinity imbue boys with a sense of responsibility and moral standing, making them less likely to harm their communities and more likely to step up as protectors. As the duo delve into policy strategies, Bet David voices his discontent over welfare initiatives, arguing they destroy communities and create a culture of entitlement rather than promoting hard work and meritocracy. They also touch on the influx of unchecked immigration Bet David believes is happening in the UK, arguing that it prioritizes undocumented immigrants over the country's own citizens. Brown and Bet David then pivot to the influence of affirming language and attitudes on children, discussing if the constant reinforcement of non-traditional gender identities could contribute to the observed cultural shifts. Bet David questions if such influence, applied without parental involvement, might be shaping societal trends significantly. Throughout the exchange, the duo utilizes bold, unfiltered language, indicative of their passionate stance on these issues. They express frustration over a perceived lack of character development and assert the necessity of resilience training for children. The conversation reflects their belief that societies need strong masculine figures and robust policies to counteract problematic trends and uplift communities. Shifting to politics, they discuss former President Donald Trump's brash stand-up approach and how it resonated with people desiring more candid, authentic leadership. Brown and Bet David state their apparent disappointment with the legal system's pursuit of Trump, suggesting that it mainly serves to impede the former president rather than strive for justice. Several references to cases involving Trump and administrative procedures are detailed, advocating for a deeper understanding of the law and its implications. Further expanding on their conversation, Bet David and Judge Brown discuss intricacies of lawmaking procedures and the indictment against Trump. Brown pokes holes in the allegations against Trump, passionately questioning when advocating for alternate news sources became a felony, and detailing the irregularities appearing in business practices that don't quite align with Trump's prosecution narrative. Moving on to the mishandling of law, they delve into the 1877 Elections Act. Brown asserts that Trump had followed the law by urging the vice president to not certify the Electoral College results due to prevalent public skepticism about their validity. The conversation veers towards the question of whether any of the multiple cases against Trump would make him unfit to run, to which Brown soundly disagrees, envisioning it as more likely to rally support for the former president. Next, they discuss election interference, with Bet David labeling these lawsuits as a way to undermine Trump's run, an act both see as a blatant display of cheating. The conversation pivots to instances of election fraud, with Brown describing cases from 2006 onwards, where the Justice Department found voting machines in Memphis and Shelby County were corrupted, and thus questioned the department's claim of non-existent election fraud in 2021. Their analysis turns global, as both men encourage their audience to read George Orwell's books, particularly 1984 and Animal Farm, to comprehend the current socio-political landscape. According to them, these works question the motives of power-hungry individuals who manipulate and oppress the public. Shifting back to contemporary politics, they delve into the potential leadership of Kamala Harris. Brown critiques her work ethic and dismisses the legitimacy of her African ancestry, arguing she perpetuates false information to cater to a certain demographic. Recalling meetings with her father and referencing her high school's records, Brown contends she maintains an active deception to suit her political agenda. Their extended debate provides a profound examination of recent political events against the backdrop of Constitution, law, and history, coupled with an analysis of potential leaders' qualifications. The discussion took an even sharper turn as Judge Joe Brown drew upon a wealth of historical and political contexts. The central theme of this section was connections, the interweaving relationships between political figures and their roles in procuring various outcomes. Brown elaborated on how Obama and the Bushes are indeed tied together through a string of familial and professional connections. In a detailed account, he explained how Obama's adopted father, Lolo Soetoro, was a vital figure who ran the death squads in Indonesia and also served as an executive for Standard Oil. A portion of the dialogue honed in on the intricate aspect of citizenship and eligibility criteria for running for president, led by Brown's intriguing insights into the United States Constitution. He underscored the distinction between two types of citizenship, one that requires an American parent and another necessitating birth on American soil. Brown also scrutinized the authenticity of Obama's birth certificate, highlighting the inconsistencies between two different certificates and the suspicious timeline of their release. This led to discussions about Obama's school years and the steep tuition fees, adding another facet to the narrative of Obama's privileged upbringing. Another predominant subject of discussion was Kamala Harris and her potential political aspirations. Brown was quick to undercut the possibility of a beneficial leadership under Harris, reverting to his critique of her work ethic and false claims of African ancestry. Judge Brown continued his critique and expressed his disdain for Obama, citing an incident from Obama's tenure in the Illinois state legislature. Brown recounts that Obama was the only one to not vote in favor of granting immunity to an elderly woman who shot intruders in her apartment, but was subsequently prosecuted for possessing an unregistered firearm. The judge didn't fail to voice his views on the issue of granting statehood to Washington, D.C. He proposed a simpler solution of ceding the district back to Maryland, thereby ensuring voting representation for the residents without granting the clout of an entire state to a relatively small population. The segment ended with Brown expressing the possibility of him becoming a Republican should the party offer an alternative who esteems values like family, manhood, duty, honor, obligation, and industriousness, as opposed to those who promote dependency through state welfare. The conversational terrain veered towards personal perspectives as Patrick Bet-David displayed his supportive inclination towards Judge Joe Brown. He explicitly mentioned that in the absence of Trump or other worthy contenders, he would readily vote for Judge Joe Brown, praising the judge for his youthful energy despite being older than Trump and Biden. The host extended the idea of their conversation further, stating that a 2-hour discussion was not sufficient. He floated the idea of a live session with an expanded 3-hour slot that could even involve audience participation, hinting at a potential venue being a comedy club. As for Judge Joe Brown, he highlighted his presence on Twitter under the handle at Judge Joe Brown TV, inviting followers to engage with his ongoing perspectives. The mention of some executive vanishing in China introduces a sense of global politics into the discussion, where the judge's critical perspective seems to continue highlighting the corrupt aspects of power dynamics. In the domain of upcoming events, the conversation pointed to Patrick Bet-David's town hall event with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., with a slight teaser that some interesting revelations could be in store given that the event coincides with the GOP debate in Alabama. Moreover, Brown mentioned other platforms where he shares his views: on YouTube with Dana, when not facing censorship, Twitter Spaces every Tuesday, and a radio syndication program with Valerie Denise Jones every Friday. The conversation wrapped with a friendly exchange, with Bet-David reminding the judge not to forget the BBQ sauce, highlighting their camaraderie and paving the way for future engaging conversations. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.